Godzilla has faced many opponents throughout his time in the Monsterverse, from big to small to powerful to weak. However, his most known and his most powerful are Ghidorah and Shimo. And since this is also when the GXK hype is dying down and also the slander for it is dying down, we should look over a full retrospective of who would actually win between these two characters, since it's not as simple as just one stomp as a lot of people think. So let's go in timeline order and look at their comparisons, starting with the ancient past. In the ancient past was specifically with the Ghidorah fight. We know that this is before the Shimo fight, with the Shimo fight being only quoted as thousands a year ago, while Ghidorah's is a lot further than this. This is important because ancient Godzilla, when he fought Ghidorah, would have access to 10 times more radiation than his base self, due to the planet having more radiation on the surface at this time. He would have been stronger in the Ghidorah fight than the Shimo one. And Godzilla also had help in this fight. No matter how you look at it, the cave paintings show either Martha or Rodan, or both were helping to fight Ghidorah in this context. In some form, Godzilla has help, and Shimo was there. There's no reason for GXK and King of the Monsters to contradict one another. Some guides even recently go on to say that Ghidorah was knocked into the ocean by Godzilla, and then the Ice Age froze her, which we know was caused by Shimo. So either Shimo was there fighting with Godzilla, and it was like a whole 2 or 3 or 4 on 1, or Ghidorah was weakened and then got frozen, likely off guard. But we knew by this point Ghidorah was caught off guard and injured, and wouldn't really have time to react or do anything. While I personally would believe that they, as cool as it would be for all of them to 4v1 and jump Ghidorah, there's nothing that really insinuates this other from headcanon, but we at least know Shimo did not do a direct attack Ghidorah. It was a off guard and weakened Ghidorah. However, we'll probably get back to Shimo's ice powers later. Shimo, on the other hand, we know that Shimo fought a weaker Godzilla, as we mentioned before, and who did not have help, and Shimo just lost outright. Just lost. People try to go around this by saying that, oh, Godzilla uses environment, oh, Godzilla only trapped it. This is never shown. Godzilla just won. Essentially, Ghidorah in the past does seem stronger, and neither seem to grow exponentially stronger in their current selves, at least. At bare minimum, Ghidorah and Shimo are just both massively above a base Godzilla. With Ghidorah, it's not only stated but shown in the Arctic fight. While he's still weakened, he holds a massive advantage on Godzilla in this fight. Godzilla even quoted as the underdog.
Yeah.
In this corner.
Yeah.
It's going down.
But
Look at that.
It's
massive.
I love it because it makes Godzilla look small. Yeah,
Underdog.
small, which never happened. He is the underdog.
I gasped when he missed. The first time I saw it.
And that was to show that, Godzilla is an underdog in this fight. His ultimate weapon, which in the last movie was his finishing move. Yeah, is useless.
Shimo, Godzilla knew he needed to ramp up and gather energy to even stand a chance against Shimo. With Colin going on to say this is the strongest opponent he's fought yet. But it'll get more obvious why Shimo is above base Godzilla by a lot, just like Ghidorah is. Now let's compare their amp forms that Godzilla takes when he fights Ghidorah versus when he fights Shimo. It's going to give us a better comparison. Starting off from the weakest with Power Plant or Energized Blue GXK. Blue GXK is overflowing with energy compared to his base state, to the point it's considered the peak of his power in terms of what his base can achieve. However, it's the only peak of his base. Obviously, Evolve is superior, and so is Supercharged Evolved. Thermo is outright called superior. It's quite obvious, but some people do like to argue the two are comparable, when nothing insinuates this except from look. However, we know that Thermo is a very specific scenario caused by Mothra, and as even the novel states, and as will be proven later, it's a much larger high level of power, so definitely not Thermo level. What about Nuke? What about Nuke Amped? Something to note is that Nuke Amped is powered by a very specific nuke specifically tuned to be this powerful. Not all Monsterverse nukes are this powerful, not all Monsterverse power plants are this powerful, only this nuke is specifically powerful enough to where this would be the case and to where Godzilla would get this massive amount of energy, shown by the massive Hollow Earth portal it opens after the explosion. Nuke Amp is also logically stronger than his ancient self, as Nuke Amp went equal to a Ghidorah who was at base while Ancient Amp helped the fight Ghidorah. Going longer, Ancient Godzilla has more impressive showings against Shimo than even Evolved does, more or less power plant. I will say the energy rating comparison for the two is a pretty dumb argument to use for both sides of the coin. Anyone who thinks Power Plant is stronger because there's energy leaking out of him, by that logic, Nuke Amp stronger is because he was going to explode, Power Plant was not. Anyways, Nuke Amp and Thermo compared to Evolved and Spiral. Obviously, Thermo is stronger than both Evolved and Spiral. People who still think otherwise are just denying it at this point. The math of the multipliers show at best Spiral is a 20 times amp, while Thermo is at least 1,000 times to the one-shotting a Ghidorah, who is above the first amp that it got, which was 100 times amp. Evolved is a 2 times amp. Even if you want to go with a 20 times amp, it doesn't change anything. And he was able to go somewhat relative to Shimo, but it's still obvious that the gap between these two titans is extremely large. As we learned better, Nuke Amp would have a lot better scaling to Shimo, maybe not above.
That came up later, and then we're already done with Egypt, and this is the supercharged Godzilla, which I think is super awesome.
There's a trace of Mothra's wing patterns in the energy bubble. It was because of Mothra's death, her sacrifice, that allowed him to become overcharged.
However, people do like to use the statement of Godzilla getting the strongest energy source of the planet for Evolved, puts it above Nuke Amp, yet it's referring to at the time. There's no reason why it would be referring to a specifically tuned nuke that was done once and never again. And none of the people in that scenario had anything to do with that specifically tuned nuke whatsoever. Now once again, let's look at the infamous Spiral statement of being stronger than ever. This obviously isn't referring to Thermo. He dodges the question when asked, and only proves that Spiral is more controlled and refined compared to Thermo, which doesn't really prove anything to power. Some people like to equate this to power when this is just never shown, and being more controlled does not equate to actual attack, potency, DC, etc. In context, it should be referring to Nuke Amp, as Boston Thermo was not gonna explode. Pulses aren't explosions mostly, and the scene some people like to use is Ghidorah exploding. We see the energy pouring out of him, not Godzilla. Nuke Amp was much closer to this explosion reality than Thermo ever was. Monarch just does not have a single energy reading on Thermo either. Something I want to note is that Nuke Amp is being compared to Spiral. Not by a lot, but if you're being somewhat relative to Spiral, that is better than Evolved. But Spiral is just Evolved's full power. So essentially the tier list is burning is massively above everything else, then you got Spiral, then you got Spiral is pretty decently above Nuke Amp, with Nuke Amp being slightly relative. I say Nuke Amp is above Evolved, and then Evolved is above Blue GXK, and Blue GXK is above Base. Now all this info out of the way, let's get back to our comparison. Shimo will evolve. Godzilla can somewhat harm Shimo in the first part of the fight. When it goes to straight up land, Shimo just massively holds the advantage, constantly overpowering waves of all thrown across the city. The novel just outright says that Godzilla is a middle class in a heavyweight fight. When he goes into Spiral while Shimo is surviving the attacks, Evolved is holding the upper hand on Shimo. Shimo doesn't seem to get any hits in, and which Japanese guidebooks say that Spiral is stronger, and commentary says Shimo is amazed with his powers.
Godzilla lights up with energy and blasts his laser breath straight up into the sky, causing colorful ripples to surge out across the clouds. The other Titans behold the phantasmagoric display. The crystalline spikes on Shimo's back light up as her eyes twinkle with wonderment.
It isn't just Shimo being Shimo, it is literally referring to Spiral's power. The only thing that suggests relativity is Kong's opinion and Hampton's opinion, which they have never seen Spiral before. Why would they be valid? For Ghidorah, a base Ghidorah was going relative to this aforementioned Nuke Amp. He takes strikes even standing through a prolonged atomic breath, as well as picking this Godzilla up and slamming him to the ground. With the novel's writer, despite the novel saying otherwise, the author says the two were equals in this fight, and in fact if Mothra didn't show up, Ghidorah could have won. Further establishing the scaling between these two, if you look at Godzilla, has a lot of nasty wounds even before Ghidorah amps himself. Overall, Ghidorah is not just highly relative to Nuke Amp, if not just outright equal. However, I wouldn't be surprised if you said that Nuke Amped was above Ghidorah. So the scaling chain would something be like this. Once again, Thermo is just above everything. Then you have Spiral. Then you have Shimo and Ghidorah being relative. Somewhat relative in this context. You can say one is above the other. Doesn't really change the point. And then either Nuke Amped is slightly above the both of them or equal-ish to both of them. And then Nuke Amped is above Evolved. Pretty much we have both of in this tier being above a base Evolved but below Spiral. They're relative. What I described before in the ancient past seems to put Ghidorah above. This is simply one interpretation of the ancient past, which I will admit there's a lot of them since we really don't know anything about the ancient past. The Monsterverse is really fucking stupid with its lore. Probably not going to know a lot for a while, which is kind of sad. It makes sense for these two in terms of attack modes and their ability to be relative. It's supported by not only the novel, calling the two similar threat levels and they're only similar, but Jared called Shimo, and who's Jared, who is Shimo and Evolved's designer, who should be biased to Shimo, if anything, if you want to use the bias point since they're even, as well as I am aware at some Shimo statements that might imply Shimo is above Ghidorah, but Ghidorah has statements of being the strongest Godzilla enemy ever. Even a most recent guidebook says that Ghidorah is Godzilla's deadliest opponent ever, which the same guidebook is referring to things like Evolved, Shimo, which are literally right there in the page. They both have statements about the other, so if you want to go one route for the other, just present the other statements. It really doesn't matter. Like, they contradict one another. Anyways, now that we went through the main scaling chains, we're going to a part of the fight people really don't like to talk about, which is essentially the nitty-gritty, the other categories, aside from like their strength, their durability, that stuff. Obviously, Ghidorah is smarter, no one's going to argue with that. Ghidorah seems to be more experienced too. He fought Godzilla more times than Shimo, fought Mothra, Rodan, and maybe some other titans too, while Shimo has really only faced Godzilla twice and Kong twice. For their abilities and hacks, Ghidorah obviously has his regen, which he can do mid-fight. However, for larger rooms, if Shimo were to tear off a head, he would need to get some form of energy. He has his storms, which he can use in combat, and even absorb other titans' energy combat, which is really extremely impressive, as well as his gravity beams, which are your standard beam attack. Shimo's main abilities are simple, it's ice. He even caught some lava near her to freeze, and she can use her beam in the sky to create sage even. More or less, the beam is an attack. Well, the beam's power is not as strong as something like Spiral Evolved's beam, and it's one that is equal to Ancient Godzilla's beam. The main threat of the beam mainly comes from the fact that it is, as so what other Shimo's ice properties be, absolute zero. It is the lowest state of cold you can be in, where atoms completely stop moving entirely, and it would likely work on Ghidorah if it hit. So while Ghidorah is more varied, Shimo's beam is just an outright win con. Something to note, however, is the beam can be interrupted, and we see with the bats that equate to only one thunderbolt of power, just outright interrupting Shimo, making her buck like a horse. Now imagine Ghidorah's gravity beam, or his storm, or even just dodging the beam. He dodged the atomic breath, which should be a similar speed to Shimo's beam. It is an aim dodge, but Shimo will stand there too, just like Godzilla probably. Who would win? Honestly, I think it's very situation dependent. In terms of raw durability and strength, Shimo takes it. She did take a hit from Steven Spiral's beam, which would probably do a lot of damage to Ghidorah. In terms of just outright physical strength, she could just toss Evolved around. If she got injured and was losing the Spiral. However, I think Ghidorah gets attack potency and speed. If Shimo catches Ghidorah lacking with the absolute zero, she would win. However, if Ghidorah gets in and just doesn't allow Shimo to use the beam, I think the edge would be slightly edge in his favor. He's more skilled, intelligent, more experienced, and has a lot of abilities to really just keep himself more in the fight than Shimo. Was the point of this video to say Ghidorah slams? No. The point of this video was to show that the matchup is very close. A lot closer than people who think Ghidorah mauls and Shimo balls. It isn't true. For both sides, it isn't. I think the leading conclusion is that while I think Ghidorah can win maybe more times than Shimo, maybe Shimo could also win. Both sides would win with extreme difficulty. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. Peace.